What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is The Deep Dive. And we are finally in week 2 of our emotion series.
Right.
What are we talking about today, Dave?
Nick, today we are going to be talking about anger.
Anger.
Does that kind of make you mad?
It does not make me mad, but who knows what we're going to get into.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen you mad.
You don't want to see me mad.
We want to work on that. I might try to push some buttons here and that. But
All right. Let's just see where we go.
All right, let's go.
All right. Well, Dave, we are in week 2 of this series, but we are about to actually do something pretty fun this week. Are you ready?
We are. I'm excited. I've been looking outside, kind of imagining the way it's all going to be. But tell us what it is.
Well, because we know that all of you are anxiously awaiting watching this, this drops on a Wednesday at noon, and at 5:30 Wednesday night, we're actually hosting a big community-wide trunk or treat here. And it's always epic.
Yeah.
And when I say epic, I mean, there's a lot of people around.
Yeah.
I think you're doing some live music this year, aren't you?
Right out there.
Right out in the courtyard.
Got some bluegrass
we got
going
hay
on.
rides. We got the trunk or treat, a free dinner. If you happen to watch this before that time, you really should come on out and join us.
Get on down. I did preschool chapel today.
Oh, yeah?
Those kids are so excited.
Yeah,
it's
the
so
chapel
much
is
fun.
awesome.
Yeah, so they're excited about Halloween. They're excited about trunk or treat. So it's going to be a good day on Wednesday. So,
and honestly,
yeah.
that's like one of my favorite parts is just seeing everybody's costumes and be able to comment on them and stuff like that.
You got a costume? You wearing a costume?
So I don't know if you are hip to some meme culture, but there was this interview done with a kid that he talked about corn.
Yeah.
And they remixed it into a song and all that. It's like, it's corn.
Yeah.
Well, my family is doing a spin-off of that, and we are being different types of corn.
Okay.
I'm actually going to dress as an old man, and I'm going to be popcorn. Rachel's coming as...
Don't give it away.
Oh, okay.
It's a surprise. Let me be surprised.
We'll see if you can figure it out tomorrow.
Let me be surprised. And
when you come down.
You're going to wear that on Monday when we have the required costume day at work?
I don't know. I might try to come up with something clever.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
Just to see.
Yeah. So
I don't know. Maybe you and me need to go in together. You said during staff meeting that you're like the Michael Scott and I'm like the Jim. So
yeah,
maybe we should play that off a little bit.
I don't like to own that Michael Scott.
Oh, okay.
All right, we better do this podcast.
Yeah. We'll get into what y'all are actually here to listen to, and that's us to really unpack this sermon that we talked about, and we spoke about anger. And Dave, why don't you kind of just give us a quick breakdown, and we'll go a little further with it.
All right. So the idea behind this series is emotions, and just kind of looking how we can be Christ honoring with our emotions. We have, it's not that we should have only the one emotion or have fewer emotions. Are really even, the idea is God created our emotions. Jesus had all the emotions. But how do we channel them in a way? Because, sometimes, and particularly in the subject that we are going in today, we can kind of act out in ways that we regret later. And that has to do with this whole idea of anger. But, there are other emotions as well that could figure into that. But specifically, we looked at anger. I'll go ahead and read that sort of the core text that we use on Ephesians 4:31 through 32. Because we're going to come back to it later in the podcast too. But it says, put aside all bitterness, losing your temper, anger, shouting, and slander, along with every other evil. So that's the negative side. Those are things we're not supposed to do. Okay, so this is sort of the antidote. This is the behavior we're supposed to have. Be kind, compassionate, and forgiving to each other in the same way God forgave you in Christ. And so during the sermon, I kind of began with putting emojis up on the screen.
Yeah.
Because, in our text messages, in our Facebook post, our Instagram post, there's like and dislike and love and all that kind of stuff. And so it sort of gives us the ability in ways to express emotions, in a nonverbal way, but by texting. And so you have some favorite emoticons or emojis you use, Nick?
I tend to just use like the laughing ones. I'm not a big emoji guy.
Yeah.
I'm not the best texter in the world, I'll admit.
Yeah.
I kind of I get to the point and then I'm kind of done.
I like that.
If you're texting me about the game, I'll tell you about the game and then I'm done or whatever. But, You know something I loved about something you said Sunday,
Yeah.
and I've never thought about like this, that the emojis are like the modern day hieroglyphics from our ancestors.
That's right.
And it really made me think. I was like, wow, that's 100%.
Like somebody looking and studying our text messages could say, like, I think these are like cave paintings or something.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes get text messages that have very few words in it. I mean, they may have abbreviations like LOL or
Right.
something like that, but they'll have like emoticons or little symbols and stuff like that. So. But it's a way I think of expressing our, and they're not all encompassing, but it just does represent that there's a lot of emojis. We have a lot of emoticons, and I put one in, that one that's like the, which I don't understand. It's kind of a goofy one.
Yeah,
but,
that's kind of what I would call it, is like feeling goofy or something like that.
but one that I think we all do understand is anger, when you put that emoticon up.
on.
And so, part of what I did, and which was kind of cool, I talked about it a little bit the first week. You talked about the brain and how our brain works in your sermon when
Yep.
you subbed in. It wasn't on emotions per se, but you talked about how like the neurons line up and create memories or habits and that sort of thing. And to me, understanding our brain kind of helps me understand myself a little bit better.
Sure.
And then when you kind of lay the foundation of Scripture alongside of that, you can see a lot of things that we've learned about the way the brain operates. The Bible already had some instruction for
Right.
Of how we get there, and so I use the example of a hand to talk about anger and how the brain works. Right here, our thumb, we're going to say, is the amygdala, and then this front up here, we're going to call this the prefrontal cortex. That's the first part of the part of our brain in the front where we do our rational thinking and thoughts and processing and things like empathy and stuff. So, this is controlling our swallowing, stuff like that. But we got this thing called the amygdala. And the amygdala serves a pretty important function because it alerts us in those fight or flight situations. There's a fire. We don't really need to have a lot of processing about how long is it going to take us to get out of the building. It's just like, get out of the building now. Or we get into some sort of dangerous situation, and sometimes we have to fight, sometimes we have to flight. And so, but the problem with the amygdala is that sometimes it's not very discerning and it just freaks out. Mm-hmm. And so when it does that, I've heard counselors and people illustrate with this, it causes us to flip our lid like that, And so suddenly we're not getting in touch with this prefrontal cortex rational stuff. And so we can have all sorts of bad behavior that happens as regardless, as a part of that. And so the idea is, how do we settle ourselves down and get our kind of brain back online to sort of be thinking rationally about, what emotion are we truly feeling? Yeah. They say that anger is a secondary emotion. It is because lots of times when we feel angry, it's really something else, right? It's not necessarily the kind of like maybe say righteous anger that Jesus showed in the temple, but we may be angry because we got our feelings hurt. Yeah. Or we might be angry because we ourselves messed up on something. Or we may be angry just because we didn't get enough rest and sleep, or didn't, our blood sugar's down from not eating lunch or something.
Right.
And so, it's important, I think, to get it back online and to be able to ask those questions. I had one quote I put up on the screen on Sunday I'll read here, which I think is helpful for us to think about too. And it says, beneath every behavior, there is a feeling. And beneath every feeling is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focus on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause, not the symptom. Oh, and I think that's probably, what we're kind of driving at. Yeah. And so, anything about that, before I move on?
That quote, it really resonates with me, I think, especially as a dad, is sometimes I find myself being surprised at what frustrates me.
Yeah.
And like, why is this upsetting me? Why am I getting mad about this or something like that? And then I realize I'm like, oh, what? Like, normally it's like, I'm feeling like I'm not being respected, or like there's always that feeling below it, you know what I mean? Below the emotion, like it's saying. But then I also think about the kids, like when they're getting upset, normally, like if they're acting different, if you can really dig past that layer of like, I need you to stop doing what you're doing and go, how was your day? Most of the time something happened. Like,
Right.
my friend didn't play with me and it really hurt my feelings or something like that. And that's like, so this really like, I don't know. I guess it brings the right words to my head and goes, yeah, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, and I think it's important to have that sort of discernment. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had like somebody that you met or somebody says something and you have like the amygdala kicks in and you realize you're having a reaction, a negative reaction about that person that might maybe making you a little angry or whatever. And then like if you can calm down, you realize that is something that's carried on from something else. That person reminds me of someone else that I had a problem with or someone who hurt me. Yes. It's really not this person. It's just what they represent.
Correct.
And, I've met people and maybe had a negative feeling about them until I really got to know them because they either looked like or talked like, or maybe they had the same background as somebody else.
Yeah.
And I made all these preconceived, notions about how that person was or what they were communicating that really weren't true.
Yeah. Oh, I have been there for sure. And, just felt like there was this type of person who, I won't go too far into it here, but, essentially they lied to me and wanted me to see certain things as like vilifying other people and stuff like that. And it really burned me down the road.
Yeah.
And now when I see somebody who has similar tendencies, like I just get the ick and I back off really quick. Like, it's part of it's an anger. Like, how could they do that? And part of it's like, I gotta go into protect mode and make sure nobody I care about gets involved with this person. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have these like reactions based on emotion.
I think most people would say about us, I know they would about you, I hope they do about me, that we're pretty easygoing people.
Yeah.
You don't see us mad a lot. But when I think about things that do kick in the amygdala for me, lots of times it's someone who I perceive as bullying somebody.
Yeah.
That will push my buttons.
Yeah.
And in particularly my family. You can be mean to me and to some level I'll take it. Right. But if I perceive you're being mean to my wife or mean to my children, man, I am ready to go out and trench a yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Trench my yard.
Well,
that's cold, man. Yeah. No, but I hear that. I think there's, I am not somebody who gets mad often. And because I've always just been taught to like try to keep as even keel as possible.
Yeah.
Because that gives me the most true understand. Like it keeps my brain focused. So I'm not firing as much, kind of like what you're talking about. I'm not as spontaneous, but the things that really do upset me and frustrate me are when I feel like there's injustice or somebody's being kept from something or, especially with people I love and care for. If, like you said, I kind of really resonate with that as like,
and that's
you
fair.
can say mean things to me and I will probably be frustrated, but I will dust it off and like wake up the next day and be okay. But you say something bad about my wife or my kids or something, like it's not like you and me are not going to be on good terms for a long time.
Well, I would say I'm more rational when it happens to me.
Yeah.
And I might get mad, but I might be more prone to come quicker to a solution. Like I really need to sit down with this person.
Yeah.
Or maybe I have something to apologize to. But with my family members, with people I'm close to, I'm a lot more protective and a lot more irrational in those moments. Now, I do want to say the other side of this, and another point I made on Sunday, I've actually made it a couple of times now, is that our way of dealing with things, you can actually, everybody's different, but there's two large categories, and one is sort of the reactive kind of person where they do like flip their lid. And then there's the stuffers. I use the example of like, you can't let a toddler who's having a fit drive the car, right? But you also cannot stuff the toddler into the trunk.
Right.
You've got to have the toddler there in the car with you. And so our anger our emotions that are negative like that are kind of like that. We do have to deal with them. And some of us have learned a process just because of being the good son or the good child, always trying to be the peacemaker and sort of overcompensate to stuff away how we're really feeling.
Yeah.
And that can be just as
Harmful.
damaging, I think. And the amygdala might kick in, but it's really our solution is to stuff it away and not really deal with it. And so I'm not suggesting that as well. Both of those things I think are equally bad.
Yeah.
And so I did come up with or give 3 different solutions. And it was interesting as I was doing research for this and looking at some stuff that I got from my own counseling and some books that I had around that, and also I watched a TED Talk online and
Sure.
about this and stuff. It was interesting to hear solutions they were giving, knowing that this was the text that I had chosen, because it was just like, this scripture is so wise. 2,000 years ago, it was already understanding how our brain works and how the human body processes stuff. Even back then, even though they may not have the science to illustrate it, it was already there.
Yeah.
This is a way to solution. And so the first solution was to breathe. And you hear that a lot. Take deep breaths when you're under stress.
Yeah.
I mean, deep cleansing kind of breaths to kind of, and that sort of slows down your heart rate and gets you calmer, so that the flipped frontal cortex can kind of get back in touch and get your brain back online. And then the second one is to name it. And if you're angry, if you're mad, if you're hurt, whatever, to go ahead and give it a name. And sometimes that takes a little thinking, because you might just say, well, I'm just mad, I'm just angry. But then when you really sit down and really analyze, and you were kind of getting to that with your kids when you were talking about them a minute ago, is that what is really going on here? Are you mad, or are your feelings hurt? Are you mad, or are you worried about your future? Are you mad, or is this, you feel like your boundary has been stepped on in a way that's made you uncomfortable? Are you mad, or did you just not eat lunch?
Right.
And so I think taking that time to name it, I think is a very, very important part of the process of getting, our anger under control,
Yeah.
And then the third part is to practice compassion. Practice compassion. So what we know from brain research is that when we do compassion to other things, like when the amygdala kicks in, part of what it is the chemicals that it's kicking out into our bloodstream are like, these things are going to cause anxiety, this cortisone that's really not good for us, why we need to take antioxidants and stuff to get rid of that, that kind of stuff. The cortisone's going in there, but the good hormones get released when we are doing kind things and compassionate. And it flows down into, the lower parts of the brain and really kind of gets us to, our best self. And so I love this Ephesians text where, it talks about, don't lose your temper, anger, shouting, slander, but be kind, compassionate, and forgiving to each other.
Yeah.
And sometimes that compassion is important, to be compassionate to yourself and say, look, I'm hurting right now.
Yeah.
I'm not I think about some of my behavior when I was going through some serious grief after losing some family members. And, I kind of felt like I had to keep going for whatever reasons. And I just wasn't my best self. And I found myself being a lot more quick-tempered and, to take the time to say, look, man, you need to chill and just allow yourself to grieve yourself,
Well, and I think you say that well, even like with the first one, when you said breathe, there's the act of breathing, but it's also giving yourself space to slow down, like that's kind of at least how I'm interpreting it. Like there's the physical, like, okay, let me breathe and calm down. But then also it's just like, sometimes you need to separate yourself from the situation to be able to be logical about it.
100%.
Or to kind of just reset your mentality towards it, So
that's well said. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think with naming it, I think ultimately we're never going to get through it unless we can recognize what power it had and not give it so much power, which that's the that's the naming it piece, is saying like, okay, this makes me mad. Being disrespected, it makes me mad or whatever.
Right.
It's okay. Now, how do I practice finding compassion and forgiveness and stuff like that within that space? Does it make sense?
Yeah, the counselors and therapists that I was looking at last week,
Yeah.
They talked about like, making that connection of being able to give a name to it. It gives voice to yourself.
Yeah.
And gives you the power. Your anger, they would say, and this is really, I guess, my greater point. Your anger is telling you something. They're not saying that anger is necessarily a bad thing. Now, lashing out, punching a hole through a wall, that's all bad. And we need to, but like your anger is trying to communicate to something. So being able to sit down and discern, because the amygdala does not communicate very well.
Yeah.
What is it that really is pushing that button?
Yeah.
And, I love what you said. And I didn't really, I thought about that as I was thinking about a more physiological way that like breathing gets oxygen and stuff. But I think that space that you're talking about and creating for yourself is very important in a very practical sense. There's
It's just
practical and physiological
Yeah,
reasons.
it's a focused way because,
Yeah.
when you're doing yoga or something, they'll talk about like focus on your breathing.
Right.
And really what that's saying is like, shut out everything else.
Right.
And just focus on what you're doing here and there. And that's the kind of process is like, if I'm in the middle of arguing with my kids or something like that, that's not the place that I'm going to decipher things well because, well, I'm in the middle of it.
Right.
I'm still actively taking part of it. It's hard for me to stop myself and go, oh, I'm not being as kind and compassionate as I need to be, or I'm not understanding that they stayed up a little too late last night or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's those times afterwards where you go, oh yeah, this is really what this is probably about. And maybe that leads to you going back and apologizing, or maybe that just leads to you understanding like, I need to be cognizant of this stuff in the future.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't know if you meant it to be this way, but I love when you use words like practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely important to keep language like that because, when we're trying these things, like I read the verse, it just says, be kind and compassionate, and it's like, sometimes I'll read that and I'll feel so bad that like, that's not my first go-to, but I think Paul's had a lot of time to practice this as well. And it knows the importance of telling us to do it, but there's a time that we have to like practice understanding what frustrates you and trying to show forgiveness and compassion. And like, sometimes it's going to go well, sometimes it might not go well, but you keep practicing. You know what I mean?
And I don't think you can put a timetable on it.
Exactly.
And that's that space that you were talking about creating because it really depends on the circumstance.
Absolutely.
You got a 4-year-old that's pitching a temper and they're kicking you and it's hurting. Well, you got to stop that behavior. That is wrong behavior. And sometimes you have to be forceful in that moment. But I think we're all, as adults, we should be discerning it enough so like that's not the issue of what's going on.
Correct.
But you got to stop the behavior. With adults, even though they might be acting like 4-year-olds, it takes a little bit more time because we have to nurture and kind of nurse our own wounds for a second. And we may not be ready to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
But when we can be empathetic enough to say, why is that person behaving that way?
Yeah.
It may not be they're just an evil, mean person. They could be going through grief. They could be off their meds.
Right.
They could be having a terrible day. They could be misunderstood. There might be something we did in our behavior that caused that. So giving a chance to say, like, and the phrase it was one of Stephen Covey's 7 habits. It was also part of the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. But I love this phrase, and I pray it a lot. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. But that's not an immediate response. And
No.
sometimes I think we have to deal with ourselves before we can get to that point. But I think that is part of what the scripture is saying about be kind, compassionate, and forgiving to each other. And it may be that person isn't asking forgiveness and will never ask forgiveness. But if we can get to the point to show the compassion, is like they really can't help themselves. I do forgive them.
Yeah.
and then set up appropriate boundaries in that case or whatever. But
I'm often the opposite of the quote. I want to be understood. I want you to understand why I'm angry, and then I'll hear your side. But you need to understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling.
right, and or you get the but that just makes the whole thing go away.
Yep.
I've got to give you the explanation of why what you did make me so angry.
Exactly.
Rather than just saying, "Look, I'm sorry, I lost it."
Yep.
Period.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is something. I do not get mad often, but when I do, that is definitely like something I'll go to. Is like, you need to understand why what you're doing is stupid.
Yeah.
And then often I'll come back and later apologize and be like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was not hearing you.
And
You know
think,
what I mean?
I do, and I think every case is different. I do think that there probably is a time where we sit down with somebody and say, "Look, I was really offended by what you said, or
Sure.
it really hurt my feelings, or you don't know. I mean, I'm sorry that I reacted with anger, but we need to talk about this."
Yeah.
And there is the listening, but I do think part of us people with stuff in the trunk is not letting our true voice be heard. And I think there's ways of doing that constructively, and there are ways of doing that are more divisive.
Right.
And so, by the grace of God, maybe we'll be more Christ-like to express.
That's just something we practice. We can practice being more Christ-like each time that comes up, and sometimes we will do well, and sometimes we're not going to do well. But that's part of the journey, right?
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
that constant renewal. It's constant growing in our faith and stuff like that.
Well, last week I think we talked about fundamentals.
Yeah.
And I do think those are fundamentals that you have to practice over and over and over again.
Yep.
And hopefully they come second nature, but you get rusty.
Yeah.
And have to be reminded. Yeah.
Yep. Well, Dave, this was great. I think too often we like to ignore the idea of being angry because nobody really likes to be angry, except maybe the Hulk. I don't know. But I think it's something that we need to tackle and we need to understand, because this is something that we all feel from time to time, whether it's somebody let us down or we let somebody else down. I will get more angry at myself than probably I will get angry at other people.
Right.
So sitting down to try to take time and understand, I think these are important things. So thank you for tackling it, and thank you guys for watching. We wouldn't do this without you guys kind of being around and keeping tabs on it and letting us know that it's something you enjoy. We do appreciate all that feedback and all the conversation that we do get to have around it every so often. So just continue to do that. Continue to hang out with us. If there's anything you'd like us to talk about, or if there's any questions that you have based on this that you'd like to throw our way, shoot it to us. There are the emails out there, the deep dive at Hickory Flat. There's comment sections below each video, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook watching it. And Dave, you got anything else to add before we shut down?
No, we got one more week of emotions.
Yep.
And I should say that this is the 5th Sunday.
Yep.
So there is one service at 10 o'clock.
That's right.
And we were doing worship planning earlier today. It's going to be off the chain. It's going to be a great, powerful worship experience. It's great to always, when we had the unified body all together in that one service, it's always great. And I think as we look at emotions, we're looking at a very good topic this weekend that I think people will like, and we'll have a good time talking about next week.
There we go. Go. Well, thank you guys for watching. And until next time, I'm Nick.
I'm Dave.
And this was The Deep Dive.
God bless.
See y'all.